Welcome to this recording of the morning workshop of class number 1 of the Arts Restabilization Emergency Response Preparedness Program, a program of the City of Los Angeles Department of Cultural Affairs. I'm Molly Quinlan Hayes, Executive Director of NCAPER, the National Coalition for Arts Preparedness and Emergency Response. And I'm joined in this program by my colleague, Tom Claerson. He's Senior Consultant for Digital and Preservation Services at Lyrasis. We're very excited to be a part of this program. Just to give a quick recap for those of you who were selected for this unique pilot program, it consists of restabilization grants, 3 workshops, 2 live and 1 virtual. And again, this is a recording of session number 1 of workshop number 1, which was held on May the 6th at Theater West. We will also hold 3 office hour sessions. These are drop-in conversation, ask questions, brainstorm sessions. You all will be developing readiness plans at the completion of the program. And I'll talk about how Tom and I can provide some technical assistance and some review of those. And all of the program materials and schedule are available online at the project website, ncaper.org/ARERPP. Here's a quick snapshot of that page. Information on when and where the workshops are, and we'll also be posting this and other recordings and handouts as each workshop concludes. I'd like to give a shout out to our project implementation partners, 18th Street Arts Center, which is the project coordinator, and our hosts for our 2 live workshops, Theater West and Skylight Theater. Thank you. NCAPER's role as a partner in this program is, again, to provide professional development through these 3 workshops, office hours, which again are online consultation opportunities. You can drop in, no need to register, and complimentary review and constructive feedback on your readiness plan drafts before you make your final submission to the City of Los Angeles. Just a quick background, NCAPER was created 20 years ago in the wake of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, in the recognition that the support structure for both artists and arts organizations was very much lacking, particularly because we are often overly vulnerable in the arts sector when disasters do occur. This is our steering committee. These are the organizations that came together as a coalition of the willing, and they include public and private partners, service organizations, funders, and connectors. You'll notice in the bottom left, Performing Arts Readiness was one of our charter members. This is a project which Tom Claerson led, which was funded by the Mellon Foundation. Excuse me. That funding sunsetted at the end of 2025, but all of the incredible resources and assets that were developed over that project's time are now housed within NCAPER. So on our website, you will find their vast library of webinars, print publications, case studies, guidance on emergency plans, and more. Our agenda for this presentation is this morning session, Readiness Planning. What is a readiness plan and what does it do? Provide some definitions and frameworks, and then actually talk through what are the elements of a plan, what does it look like when it's put together, and then some ideas on how to connect your plan to your everyday work and practice. The afternoon session, Risk Assessment, has been recorded, is hosted by Tom, and is also available on the project website. I'll start by sharing some working definitions. These are not the only definitions, but the ones that we'll use in this program for ease. An emergency being something that happens unexpectedly, but usually is small and local, often within your space, has a kind of a finite beginning, middle, and end, and then it's resolved. Obviously, emergencies can be large in scale and quite damaging. A crisis we define as a point in an event when a decision needs to be made of which direction to go, to choose. And then a disaster being the large scale nature that you all are unfortunately familiar with and this often affects many, many people, may interrupt communication systems and infrastructure, and usually require some sort of public sector governmental response, and often, of course, has a long, long recovery time. In our work, we consider a wide array of types of crises and disasters. The natural ones that we automatically think of: storms, earthquakes, floods. Of course, we have the pandemic, wildfires, and structural fires. But we also hope that we will consider reducing our risk for human-made types of disasters: vandalism and theft, arson, violence, civil unrest, accidents, traffic accidents, chemical accidents, structural accidents, and then, unfortunately, the bad actors, active shooters, threats. We are so reliant on technology that technological hazards are very critical. Power surges, the failure of hardware or software. Unfortunately, again, bad actors doing ransomware or cyber attacks. Security breaches, which can put you at risk. And of course, internet or power outages. And then we also are seeing more and more conversation around this new category of crisis, a phrase which Tom has come up with, which are those administrative disasters such as sociopolitical shifts and impacts, cuts in funding, sudden departure of a key personnel, reputational disasters, and the crisis communications that need to flow from that, event and tour cancellations, or artwork that's lost or stolen. So all of the above can really happen to any type of organization or business. But layered on top of that are the inherent risks that we have because we are in artistic practices. Whether we're in a solo practice or as part of an organization, we're typically working in tight financial margins. We don't have a lot of room to deal with emergencies, and our revenue sources may not be diversified. So a shift in one can put us at great risk. Many of us are in one person or small team operations, so we are wearing many hats. We have competing responsibilities. And then we are unique in that we are stewards. We are have an obligation to care for either the work that we are making or presenting or preserving. So we have an obligation to the public and to our community to safeguard those assets. And then finally, the tension that many of us experience between why we got into this work, the artistic part of it, the artistic practice, but then the time that is necessary to do the administrative and non-creative parts of our work. And that obviously creates a tension in terms of where you're going to allocate your time and your resources. So with those in mind, let's switch to understanding the disaster management cycle. This is used by the disaster management, emergency management sector. And one reason that we are sharing some of this lingo and these processes is so that there can be better understanding between the arts community and the emergency management community. The more we understand how each other work and each other's language, the more effective we can be in both mitigating crises and also responding to them. So this is the typical cycle of any kind of incident. 12 o'clock is when the event happens. That first quadrant is the immediate response. This is usually, firstly, life protection and safety, and secondly, property. So that's the immediate. The next phase being recovery, restoring operations, rebuilding, getting back to where you were, or as my predecessor, Jane Newcomb, would say, getting back better. You would like to end up better than you were before. Mitigation, which is once you have recovered, to do some reflection on where were your greatest damage, or where are your greatest risks, how can you mitigate those, minimize your risk, and then where you can't minimize risk or be ready for everything, preparedness, the type of planning that we're going to be talking about, which allows you to have thoughts and decisions and plans in place so that you can keep things going when something does happen out of left field. Now, this cycle, this is a small emergency, this may take very little time. Perhaps it's a slip and fall incident in the lobby of your theater. So that happens at the 12 o'clock point. there is a response. The staff and immediately tends to the patron, finds out whether they need medical attention or not, gets them back seated, maybe gives them comps to the next show, fills out an incident report. So that takes you through the response and the recovery. Mitigation, after the show, you do a debrief and you figure out why the slip might have happened. Was there water? Was there damage to the handrail? Was there bad signage? How can you fix that so that someone else tomorrow night won't slip in the same place? And then preparedness is being ready for the next time that something happens, or do you know that all of those pieces are in place? Did you have the training? Did you have the incident report process in place? So again, in a small situation like that, this whole process might take, 30 minutes. However, we know that in a large scale regional disaster, this process is going to take years, if not decades. And this is not a clean cycle. I mean, many of these overlap, and so it isn't quite this tidy, but at least it gives you a sense of this cycle. And we're going to talk about how you can kind of have agency within each of these sectors. Why is readiness planning important? Because what happens in an emergency or crisis is that your brain moves into a different space and your typical daily cognitive abilities drop tremendously. Your instincts are to take you into either fight, flight, or freeze. I think we're all familiar with fight and flight, but freeze is something that happens very frequently in a disaster, which is where you simply are paralyzed and you can't decide what to do. Either there are several options in front of you, you don't know which to take, or some people are waiting for someone to tell them in which direction to go. Because of this, that's why it's so critical to do this kind of thinking before the emergency happens, because this is not a good time to be making really important critical decisions. You want to have made those ahead of time. This is why we all did fire drills when we were in grade school, so that you don't need to think. You just automatically know that fire alarm goes off. You immediately walk to the door. You follow the evacuation route. You have your buddy, and you know where the meetup spot is to make sure that everybody is safe. That's what we need to be thinking about for all of our business operations. When it comes to readiness planning, the secret is that there's actually no secret. I know this might kind of feel very mysterious, but we're going to talk through steps that many of them are just very logical, and many of them you probably are already doing. You just haven't thought about it in the framework of readiness planning. So let me assure you that a lot of this process is about applying your existing strengths, your knowledge of your practice, your collaboration skills, your creative and problem solving skills. That's what artists are. They are problem solvers. So we believe that there's a lot of readiness that's already innate in your practice. We also recognize that readiness planning is an ongoing process. It is also a cycle that keeps going over time, and there's no perfect. There is just good. And so don't expect there to be a final product that is a beautiful document that is going to be the result. This is really about a thought process and a way of a lens through which to look every day, as much as it is ending up with something on paper or digital. We do want to acknowledge that new habits need work so that they'll stick, which is why we will talk about training and drills. And we hope that we will be able to show you steps you can take so that you can build physical, tangible plan, one that you and your team, if you have one, will actually be able to use, because otherwise there's no point. So the first thing before we jump in further is I'd like to give you just a couple of minutes to reflect on the fact that in many ways you've got this. We know that you already have skills and resources that you have used that can be applied in a crisis situation. So I'd like you to reflect back on an emergency that you've experienced, recognizing that we're asking you to bring up some difficult memories. So take the time in all of this that you need to care for yourself, your emotional health, step away when you need to, But if you could reflect whether this was a small emergency, the wildfires or COVID, what are the things that you already had in place or you were able to do? It might have been people that you called on, ways that you helped your community, team members that you were able to loan to other organizations, ways to provide solace to people around you, communications channels. Just take a few moments to note some of those down because those can be a core part of your plan. So just want to give you a few minutes to do that, and then you can come back. Great. Hang on to those notes. A few more definitions or ways that I have come to think about readiness planning. And this is after working with hundreds of organizations on developing readiness plans of all scopes and sizes. And while in the beginning, I thought it was really important to come up with that written down paper plan or digital plan, I still think it's important. But actually, that's the result, that's the end product. The important work is going through an intentional decision-making process about what you will do and who will do it in an emergency or if one of your resources is suddenly unavailable to you. It's these decisions that we hope these classes will guide you through so that you can come up with a plan that is the exact right scale and type for you and your particular practice or operation. And you might hear, again, some of these terms bandied about, but just so you kind of understand what people might be talking about, these concentric circles represent kind of different levels of a plan. The core one, a disaster plan. This is really how do you protect yourself, your assets, and your people in a disaster. Again, life, safety, and protection, and property. And so this will be a core part of your plan. And our final workshop, where we're back on site at the end of June, will really focus on making sure that you have this in place and that you're able to connect with others. Continuity of operations, COOP, business continuity plan, or other terms that you might hear. And this will be part of our workshop number 2. And this is really thinking about what are the most important parts of my operation that need to be back up and running as soon as possible if they are interrupted. For some, it might be you need to get your communications back up. For others, it might be I really need to get my youth programs started again because that's where our revenue is. For some, it might be I need to get my facility back open so that the rentals can happen. It's going to be different for everybody, but you're thinking about critical business functions. Next, scoping out is the readiness plan, which we are hoping to think about, which encompasses both of those, but also looks at all of the areas of your operations, and we'll kind of list those in a minute. But thinking about what is going to be your kind of plan B, your ability to withstand an interruption to not only your critical immediate operations, but your people, your finances, your programs, your assets and collections. Those typically tend to be internally focused. Then the last scope, which is beyond the scope of this program, but you might want to be thinking about it, is a resiliency plan. And this is really defined as looking more external. And this is how you are positioning yourself, your practice, your organization to be adapting to the changing external world, whether that's climate change, financial shifts, socio-political changes, and often this is working in tandem with others. So responding to the exterior environment. Okay, getting down to brass tacks. We've been kind of abstract up till now. So let's think about the actual concrete elements of what is in a readiness plan. You can design a readiness plan any way that you want and you should design it in the way that you are going to use it. We're just presenting to you some models and some structures that we hope might be helpful. I think about what's in a plan as living in three different buckets. One bucket is information, facts, contacts, assignments. This is our plumber, and this is how to get hold of them, and this is their cell number. This is our insurance policy, and the types of coverage that we have, and our insurance broker. This is where we house our spare checkbook. Also, assignments. If something happens, who's our second check signer? Who is responsible for shutting down the building if we know that there's a storm coming? It might also be excerpts of relevant policies. So, for instance, you might want to include, if you're a nonprofit, from your bylaws. What's the clause from your bylaws that explains how your board can call an emergency meeting? Because really what you want in your plan are things, many of these may be things that already exist, but kind of centralized and compiled in one place so that you can grab and go if you need to. The second bucket is instructions, your backup plans. If you do have to shut down your studio safely, how do you do that? Maybe you have a checklist on how to shut down your equipment, unplug everything. Who are you going to call? How are you going to secure your assets and leave? This might be what or how to do critical functions. This is how to turn off the water main, etc. And then actions. There are always going to be things that are not going to get decided or done by July when our work concludes with you all. So you might want to list things that are future actions to improve your readiness. You might say, okay, we've identified that as a risk, we need to do some crisis communications training, or we know that we need to buy some water alarms in case our storage area is flooded. And so we're going to budget, $1,000 next year into our operating budget for that. So you can list your future actions that you want to take. This also might be your schedules. Every quarter I'm going to do a walk around in my studio to make sure that there aren't any, that my housekeeping is good and there aren't any, too many things plugged into an outlet. This is also where you might have some templates, like a template, a press release in case there's a crisis. You obviously would fill in the details, but having that ready to go. So again, that you don't need to waste time when the crisis is happening with laying the groundwork that you could have put into place already. And how is a plan used? There are multiple ways. It's a formal documentation of what to do in a crisis. So particularly if you're in an organization, it is the policy of what you do. It's also a place to refer to it. If you forget or you're unclear, you can refer to it or point people to it. It can be a valuable training guide, information source for new people that come onto your team. It's also a way to check yourself. Are you adhering to your commitments? Are you following the steps that you said to yourself that you were going to make? And as a touchstone, but it is a tool, and you shouldn't rely on it unless you are starting to habituate it into your everyday life and work. Habits supersede documents. Again, it's kind of a lens through which to look through the way that you work and the way that you operate in ways that you're always thinking about, oh, could that be less risky? Could I put something into place here? And I follow these readiness planning basics because I just think they're healthy. The first is no guilt. If you haven't done any of this yet, that's fine. You're here and you're doing it. So whatever you have or haven't done up to the point of today, that is fine. You're just going to start where you are, build from what you have. We want to harvest wisdom. We have, been through crises. If we are here today, at NCAPER, we have, again, worked with hundreds of organizations and people who have been through all manner of crises. Try to harvest that wisdom and those lessons that were learned in difficulty so that the next person doesn't have to. So we hope that you will, in these workshops, share with us and share with each other. because the more we learn, the more we can all be resilient. Don't cookie cut. It is not only not advisable, but it could be risky for you to simply take someone else's emergency plan and plug in your own information. Again, I strongly believe, because I've seen it in action, that it's the decisions that lead into the plan that are important. If you copy someone else's plan, it's not going to be inherent to you, your organization, your needs, your scenario. And some of the just key concepts for readiness planning are redundancy and dissemination. So redundancy, making sure there are copies of everything. When I worked in an office, I had my staff contact list. I had 3 copies, one at home, one at the office, and one in my glove compartment in case I needed to evacuate. So having multiple copies of things and distributing them, whether that is in different physical places, different mediums, in my desk and in the cloud, or in different people's brains, right? It's a risk if only one person knows how to do something or knows who to contact. When it comes to your plan, this is a quote from Albert Einstein: everything should be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. And I really believe this in readiness planning, that you should distill it as much as you can, but you don't want to leave out anything critical. But I also think that the inverse is true, which is don't make this more complex than it needs to be. Um, you want something that will be useful. I have seen major performing arts centers with 200-page emergency plans that have taken into consideration every single possible thing that could happen. And I would wager that those never get read and never get used. So I believe that, again, make it as simple as possible, no more complex than you need to. Okay, again, getting into brass tacks. Literally, what kind of content is your plan going to have? What is going to end up in this final document or digital file? On the left are some kind of administrative pieces, and then on the right are the different buckets of your operation. So let's go through those briefly. The first 3, 1, 2, 3 on the left, are typically relevant to an organization, not necessarily a solo artist or ensemble, but approval and distribution. This can be a record of your board's approval and adoption of the plan. I believe that an annual board resolution to the plan is important so that they are invested in it, as well as the staff. And you also want to keep a record of how it is distributed, because it does have, some sensitive information. So you want to keep track of who has access to it. A statement of purpose, it can just be a paragraph, but just describing, again, what this plan is, when it was created, and what it is for. This can be helpful, for instance, if a new staff member or new board member comes in and they're reading it to understand why have you invested in this process. An executive summary, which can be brief, I would say no more than 2 pages, that outlines the process you've gone through, how recent your plan is, and the types of area that it covers. But you don't want to include in it all the kinds of sensitive data and instructions and personal information that is likely to be in your plan. The reason that this might be beneficial is if you are speaking to, for instance, a potential donor or a potential board member. What an executive summary can do is demonstrate that you are protecting the investment that they have or may be making into your practice or your organization. And this is coming up more and more in the philanthropic community, that people are looking for readiness and emergency plans. And so this can kind of demonstrate that you are thinking forward, that you are planning, and it might potentially make you a stronger funding candidate. Item number 4, risk assessment and mitigation goals. This can be, again, just a way to track for yourself what your biggest vulnerabilities are and how you're going to address them. And the other session, which is recorded by Tom, can talk you through that risk assessment and how you figure out how to put some mitigation steps into place. If nothing else, 5, 6, and 7 are the most important, the key part. That's that core part of your emergency plan, which are geography, maps, and key locations. Where are the emergency exits? Where is the meetup spot if you have to evacuate? Where is the emergency equipment? Where is the area of safe refuge for people with disabilities? So make sure that you have, even if it's just very cursory, you have a graphic, a physical visual of where all of those things are. Preparedness and response basics. I advise that you just write down some basic things about who are the emergency people to call. Obviously, 911. But if there are other emergency or urgent vendor contacts, this is who on the staff knows CPR. This is who is responsible for the building. I mean, just some things so that, again, when you're in a crisis and your mind's not at 100%, you can just grab this and say, okay, this is how we handle the basic emergencies. Number 7 is your emergency response team, or ERT structure. This is your chain of command. If you are a solo practitioner, this might be you, although you might want to think about having a buddy, someone who might be geographically close to you, and you can be part of each other's team and call on each other if you're in need. But if you're in an organization, you want to have one person. It may or may not be the director, but you want someone who's calm under pressure. The director may need to be kind of managing board and press and things like that, but someone who has training and is authorized to make decisions, tell people what to do, and all of the information goes through them in and out so that there's one person who sees the whole picture. And then you may want to include your plan administration and schedule to document who is responsible for keeping this plan up to date. It should live with someone formally so that they're responsible for kind of carrying the torch on this on an ongoing basis. And if there is a schedule, you want to update it at least once a year, for instance. So then moving to the right-hand column, these are what we define as your critical business functions. And we will get into this in our business continuity workshop as well. But it might be helpful to think about breaking your plan into these kind of areas. Your facilities and physical threats to people, places, and assets. People, who are your key people? What do they know? And how do you fill in for them if they are missing? Your programs, having a readiness plan in case an interruption happens in one of your programs. Crisis communications, both internal and external. Your IT, your software, hardware, and how do you manage your data and information and protect it? All of your finances, insurance, and legal support systems and protective measures. Your assets and collections, and you have these regardless of what discipline you work in. This could be obviously your inventory, your artwork, your digital records of performances, your music library. You have assets and collections that are valuable. Always trainings and drills, making sure that you just kind of build this into your muscle memory. You might also think about other pieces that could be helpful to include in your plan, such as a resource list, and we can provide you with those resources that are around at the state and national level to help you in a crisis, who to call. And then any appendices that are going to help to support your plan. That might be like training materials or things like that. So you need not include all of these. We just kind of are providing this menu from which you can kind of pick and choose. So we've talked about the abstract, kind of what a plan is for, what is in it, what does a plan actually look like? There were three actual plans that I shared during the workshop, and they are on the website. And they're really just to give you kind of a sense of the array. Because again, you want to make it as simple as possible, no more complex than it needs to be. On the project page, you will see, for instance, a sample plan from Dance Cleveland. This is one that I was involved in. It falls into that big sphere of readiness plan, so it covers all of those buckets of critical business functions. This is a major dance presenter that works in large venues in Cleveland. And so it's a fairly robust plan. I think it runs maybe about 40 pages. A different type of plan, which kind of looks at as the emergency action plan, is provided, and that's from Streb, which is a dance company from the Northwest. And it again really focuses on physical threats and vulnerabilities for people and places. Then there is one that I literally mocked up. It's 2.5 pages, handwritten, and it's something that might work for an individual studio artist. So it is literally, it kind of looks at those functions, but each one is just a couple of points. You have a couple of people, you have a couple of things around communications. And so again, feel free to skim through those just to get a sense of what they look like. Again, not to use them as templates, but as springboards for thinking about, boy, these are the kinds of pieces, or this is the kind of layout or order that I think my plan is going to be most useful. So, steps for creating your plan. And you don't need to do this now, but we just want to talk about kind of what the process is. And then over the next 6 weeks, we'll continue to move this forward. But these are the ways in which you might think about creating your plan. You start with the understanding and assessing. So identifying what your critical business functions are, potentially in those buckets. Inventorying your assets and collections. So understanding what are the physical and ephemeral things that you need to protect. This is also kind of collecting information that you already have and starting to centralize it. As I mentioned, your financial information, your insurance information. And then you want to assess your risks and vulnerabilities. Watch Tom's recording of his session, because you cannot protect yourself from everything. It's most important to figure out what are my greatest risks and greatest vulnerabilities that I need to focus on first. The second kind of wave is to do your planning and protect. You want to plan ahead and strengthen your protections. So setting your protection priorities. What needs protection most? Tom tells the story of the Alley Theater in Houston that was hit very severely by Hurricane Harvey. And they had, I think, 100,000 props that were damaged by water. But they knew which ones were most used most frequently or had historical or special value or nature. So they were able to identify, I don't know the number, but those that were most important to preserve and protect and salvage. So they had that list. You want to identify your mitigation strategies. What can you mitigate? Do you have enough insurance and the right type? Are there roof leaks that you need to take care of? Again, what are your mitigation strategies? How are you going to lessen those risks? Then developing your business continuity plan for your basic business functions. And we'll be doing that on our webinar in late May. Then you also, we hope that you would consider legacy planning and archiving, making sure that your history is preserved and maintained securely. And thinking too about if you're founder driven, how you will start planning that legacy when that needs to transition. And then finally, stage 3 is implementing and putting it into action. Working with your team again to make these decisions. You've done this assessment, you've collected information, you've figured out what your vulnerabilities are. Now sit down with your team if you have one and say, okay, this is the best choice for this situation. This is who's going to be assigned to what. Make those decisions with your team. Document those actions, roles, and procedures. Share that with everyone. Make sure everyone is trained and they're comfortable knowing what they could be expected to do and run drills. And then regularly adapt and update that. Again, this is a continuous improvement process. It's never perfect. You always will be going through it. But once you do the bulk of this work now, it will just be a matter of improving and refining over time. Getting back to the idea of an emergency response team. Again, this is making sure that you have a chain of command, because there is nothing worse than people being given different instructions or potentially competing instructions in an emergency situation. So if you have a large team, large-ish, you may want to think about making these types of assignments. A team leader, again, the person who has authority and through whom all information passes. An assets recovery leader, this is the person, again, at the alley who knows which are the most important things to salvage and preserve. Public relations or communications, someone who is making sure that if your event is interrupted or canceled, that your ticket holders know what's going on, that you can get communications out in a timely fashion. Logistics. Okay, we've had a water leak. Who's going to make sure that there's a carpet cleaning company that can come in? Who calls the plumber? Who puts all the logistics together? Do you need to bring volunteers in to help rip out the carpet? And then someone to document this. Hopefully you have some documentation of your space in its normal state, and I would highly recommend that. But then you also need someone to document all of the damage, take physical documentation, take pictures, make notes of everything so that you can do the insurance claim or the fundraising that's necessary to replace. There are a number of templates and tools in addition to these workshops that are out there and able to help you if you would like to explore them. The D-Plan/Arts Ready is an online tool that was developed for particularly small and mid-sized arts organizations to develop a plan kind of on a DIY basis. And it goes all the way through risk assessment, putting your action plan into place, and then creating the document. But particularly the risk assessment, if you find that that's a little bit of a challenge for you, it literally asks you 8 or 10 questions in people, and 8 or 10 questions in facilities, and 8 or 10 questions in finances and insurance. And you can figure out where you're good, where you're set and you're ready, and where there is a gap and you need to kind of mitigate that in some way. And that's at dplan.org or artsready.org. They also have on that website the Pocket Response Resource, which is a 2-page kind of an emergency information sheet. And it's designed for arts and culture organizations. On one side, it's a place to store all of your information. And on the flip side is instructions of who to call or what to do in a certain situation. You could put a floor plan on there. But the idea is that it is the most basic information that you would want to have on site, that you can literally tuck into your pocket. An usher can put it in their lanyard. You might have it on your phone. It has all that basic information and it can be distributed to many people. The Studio Protector is a long-standing tool from our friends at CERF, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, developed for studio artists, but much of it is relevant to individual practitioners of all disciplines. But it is a great tool for thinking about how to protect your studio safety-wise, how to do kind of a safety assessment. It talks about business insurance for artists. It really goes personal safety, studio shutdown protocols, all of that, and that is free. And then on the flip side, we at NCAPER have put together a guide. It's not as robust, but it takes some of the same concepts, but applies them to non-studio artists, so performing artists and companies, literary artists and media artists. And that's on the ncaper.org website. Okay, I've thrown a lot at you, but let's think about how we actually start to put this together. You've gone through these steps. How do we put this into action? The puzzle pieces. Here, I'm going to share 2 thoughts about how you might actually make your decisions, and then construct your documentation, your written plan. So let's think about people as your critical business function, and looking at these 3 buckets of information, instructions, and actions. These are just some examples to get your thinking going. In terms of the information, you might want to include an org chart, so you know who has authority and responsibility to make decisions or can make assignments. Emergency contact information. Again, this is how to reach all of my key people if they are off duty. Where you can find your job descriptions, so that if suddenly someone has appendicitis and is out for a week, how do you find a job description if you need to pull in a temp for their duties? Again, how the board might be able to call an emergency meeting, what legally they're able to do. Your instructions might include, for instance, what to do if you are a touring artist, what to do and who to call if you're hurt or ill while on tour, so that you can hand that to your host, or someone who's traveling with you. Where to find temporary staff. Maybe you need to know which other theater runs the same type of ticketing software that yours does, and you can call on them for temp staff. And then the actions that you list under people might include, I'm going to create an emergency response team, or I need to make sure that we add our readiness plan as part of the new hire orientation and onboarding process. So again, yours will be different, but this is just to kind of get your juices flowing. Another example, in your facilities section, your information might include, this is how to contact my landlord. This is where my emergency equipment is located. Instructions, how to turn off the water main. What's the checklist of closing down before a temporary closure? What is our response? How do we handle it if a bomb threat gets called in? What are those instructions? And then actions. We're going to commit that we're going to take all of our staff to CPR and first aid training once a year. We're going to do a walkabout to do our risk assessment quarterly and make sure that there's no new damage or dangerous situations. So again, look at your business functions, think about, what are the types of information, instructions, and actions you want to decide on and list. Again, just some broad brushstrokes. Always consider your risk assessment and risk mitigation. Your plan is not going to be perfect. You can't cover everything. So look at the places where you're most vulnerable, or where a crisis occurring would have the most damage or most impact. So determining those priorities. Which are the risks that are either most likely to happen? Do you live in a floodplain? Or would be most risky to you? If you keep all of your inventory for your jewelry craft in one trailer and that gets stolen, which assets are the most important? Which operations do you absolutely need to make sure you've got a backup plan for? Again, your business continuity, which operations need to get going as quickly as possible. Think about, what do you write down? How do you store and share that? Again, there are some things that are sensitive, whether that are your staff's personal phone numbers and emails. So you might find that there are some sections of your plan that are just general and fine to be shared with everyone, like that's 5, 6, and 7, right? Your floor plan, your emergency response team structure, your preparedness and response basics. Everybody on your team or in your co-op, you want all of them to have that. But then some of that more sensitive stuff might only be available to you or to department heads. So, just think about how to break it up like that. How are you going to update this? Who's going to be in charge of it? How are you going to make sure that you include new people, or if you expand your studio space, or if you bring in some new equipment, make sure that those are built in. Pick the low-hanging fruit first. Again, there are some of these things that are going to be easy to put into place. Just do those, get them done, get them out of the way. And in all of this, pick out what's applicable and useful to you and disregard what's not. This is for you. So you get to make the ultimate decision. There is no expectation of what this looks like in the end. Again, we've talked about how you use it and who uses it, information, instructions, the actions, and then again, reviewing your emergency response team. If you're a solo practitioner, you could consider bringing in volunteers. Your board needs to be part of this if you are a nonprofit, so that they are invested in it and they may well have some responsibilities, and making this part of your regular operations. Again, there are some sample plans on the ncaper.org/ARERPP page. Also on NCAPER under Performing Arts Readiness, there are a number of other types of sample plans that PAR supported during its lifetime. Feel free to view those again as inspiration or as instruction, but not to copy wholesale. So what happens when it's done? Well, spoiler, it's never done. It's going to always hopefully be a living thing that you are refining and improving all the time. You might even streamline it over time. It's never perfect, and that's fine. Um, we're not looking for perfection here. Again, reminder to think about distributing it in ways that are safe and secure and who you might want to share it with. Thoughts about embedding this within your practice or organization, because we do not, any of us, I think, involved in this project want to make this yet another layer on a very heavy workload that you already have. Any ways that this can get incorporated into what you already do is the best route. So here's some thoughts about that. Looking inward, doing the basics now, the getting your inventory, making sure that you have written down everything that you own and its value, taking your smartphone and walking around your space and recording the condition of every single thing that you own. Those of you who've had to submit insurance claims know that they are looking for, every single spice jar that was on your shelf for your claim. So making sure that you have that kind of before condition and possessions is important. Get your emergency equipment and plans if you don't already. If you have a fire extinguisher but don't know how to use it, get training on that. Put together your contact list. Make sure that your data backup is done on a regular basis, either manually or automated. Think about, again, what you already have in place or what you already know that will serve you in an emergency. And make sure that this aligns with your existing values. For instance, if you are committed to community engagement, your plan and your choices might look very different than if your organization's mission is about preserving the canon. You will have different decisions about which are for your business continuity, which ones are most important, which assets to protect. They're going to be very different. So make sure that your mission or your values are part of your decision-making process. Then as you look externally in terms of readiness in the context of your community, we know that those who thrive in a crisis are those who have a connection, professional, personal, social networks. We also saw in COVID that the organizations that really maintained and stayed healthy through that were those who were connected and relevant to their community and were looking to serve their community rather than just kind of putting up walls and protecting themselves. So I just observed that as something. Readiness in community. You may get to a point where you think about, okay, I wanted to know, or I want to be able to be a community resource if something happens in my neighborhood, in my town, in my city. So what are the things that I could be prepared to do if my neighbors need help? And again, networks. Tapping into existing networks or creating new networks. We will also talk about this in workshop number 3. If you have networks, how might you make sure that they also are thinking about how they can be response networks and provide mutual aid in an emergency? Finally, ways to make it sticky. I would say use existing opportunities and activities. If you have a board retreat once a year, make that the time when you talk through what the board responsibilities are or what your priorities are for the next year for readiness, so that they can approve and adopt that. Think about when your annual check-ins and updates are. If you already have, a time when you are, for instance, putting your budget together, make sure that that is when you are thinking about what you might need to invest in readiness. Or if you're doing annual performance reviews, and make sure that the people are thinking about their readiness responsibilities as part of that. Thinking about it in job descriptions and reviews, making sure that people have formal assignments for this work. Incorporating it again into your existing activities and scheduling drills and tabletops. Anyway, again, things that you do on a regular basis that you don't need to think a lot about there are ways that you can connect this to what you're already doing. It's going to make it that much easier. So, in wrapping up, this is, again, the beginning of a process. We have 6 more weeks with you all, office hours and workshops to continue this work. We are meeting again on May 27th. This is a 3-hour online webinar when we will look at business continuity, recovery, and mitigation strategies. And then we will join you back in person at Skylight Theater on June 25th. We'll be looking at disaster and emergency management, have a talk about how your readiness plans are shaping up, again, doing some crowdsourcing, harvesting that wisdom, and talking about principles of networking and mutual aid. Our office hours, these are drop-in Zooms. The Zoom link is on the program website on these 3 dates. We'll be sharing more details about once you start to put your plans together in June and July, how Tom and I can be available to provide you with any feedback that you might like. We've been throwing a lot at you, but there are a wealth of resources out there. If you would like to learn more, this is a long list of all of the amazing PAR webinars that were recorded and are now available 24/7 on ncaper.org. Everything from, again, business continuity to cybersecurity tips, getting started with the D-Plan Arts Ready tool, health and safety in the performing arts. There's a fairly new one that is really popular, which is how to decide when to reschedule or cancel an event, whether it is because of a weather threat or a human threat, but how do you make those decisions? So, give yourself a lunch and learn, twice a month and sit down with a free webinar. We do work in a family of organizations in culture, heritage, preservation, and the arts. So this is just to let you all know that we do talk with each other and we think about how we all take pieces of the pie. But some of these are specialized. On the left, FAIC manages the National Heritage Responders. These are conservationists, conservators from all over the country that volunteer their time in the wake of a disaster to help. Some of you might have run into National Heritage Responders when they did some clinics after the wildfires to help with salvaging artifacts, photographs, printed material, that kind of thing. We work with Surplus, the Craft Emergency Relief Fund, and then D-Plan Arts Ready, which is the online tool. The Houston Arts Alliance also has a full-time disaster services person in the arts, and they've created some great short videos on topics. They are not specifically for Houston. They're relevant really anywhere. They're available at the HAA YouTube channel. And that is the end of this workshop. So thanks so much. And again, we will be online on our office hours. Please reach out to me or Tom if you have any questions. Good luck with your planning, and we will see you soon.